On this Friday night, making things right ahead of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. A stolen sacred monument returns to its rightful place in BC.
It'll resonate through all of the First Nations.
A First Nation celebrations for a homecoming nearly a century in the making. Demands for change on the path of reconciliation.
Your granddaughter, your daughter was sitting in a landfill. What would you do?
What Indigenous communities say the country is still lagging behind on. $1 billion off defense. What Canada's top soldier is warning as Ottawa aims to cut down military spending. And remembering an American political trailblazer, the legacy that U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein leaves behind after serving to the very end.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. We begin with a long-awaited homecoming in northwestern BC. The Nisga'a First Nation is celebrating the return of a memorial totem pole nearly a century after it was taken without permission. Indigenous communities have long carved their memories, laws, and spiritual beliefs into sacred totem poles. Once outlawed in Canada, many were destroyed or taken by traders and sold around the world. A community welcoming ceremony was held for the sacred structure after its arrival home from Europe. The journey was long and complex. The 11-meter red cedar totem pole was taken 94 years ago and sold to the National Museum of Scotland. Global's Neetu Garcha is in Nisga'a Nation for the emotional homecoming tonight. Neetu.
Eric, especially for survivors who have endured the horrors of colonization for generations, there are many layers of meaning to this moment. The Nisga'a Museum behind me houses hundreds of stolen artifacts returned after the nation signed the first modern treaty in BC more than 20 years ago. And while there are still several sacred items missing, this totem pole was high on the list. This is a momentous occasion for Nisga'a Nation and beyond.
And it marks the beginning of true reconciliation when it comes to bringing our ancestors home.
For day school survivor President Eva Clayton, the long-awaited return of a sacred totem pole to the lands on which it was carved from red cedar is as exciting as it is emotional.
For me, it's validating what had happened, and the return of this pole is incredible.
We hope that it is also inspiring and giving colonial institutions just further support in terms of doing the right thing.
Dr. Amy Parent first found out it was in Scotland 4 years ago. She says her ancestral grandmother had the 11-meter memorial pole carved in honor of a warrior who was destined to become chief before being killed protecting his nation.
It's been nearly 100 years since the totem pole was stolen from us by colonial ethnographer Marius Barbeau.
My heart is so happy to be here with you.
Honoring the nation's matrilineal society, they call it a rematriation. Considered to have a living spirit, the totem pole is like a relative finally returning home. Dr. Parent was among the delegation to Scotland last year, who after 3 months of negotiations successfully secured the return. The pole traveled on a Canadian military strategic airlift aircraft from Scotland to Terrace, BC, and then transported by road to the Nisga'a Museum in the community of Lackalzap. Some 1,000 people are participating in a ceremony and feast tonight, including community members, federal and provincial politicians, and representatives from the Museum of Scotland, as they mark the completion of a journey nearly a century in the making. Eric?
Thanks, Neetu. Neetu Garcha in Nisga'a Nation. Later, a report card on reconciliation in Canada. We'll look at the path forward on this weekend of reflection and healing. But first, Canada's top soldier is warning of a bumpy road ahead for the armed forces. The federal government is looking to slash almost $1 billion from the Department of National Defence. The move is part of a wider Liberal campaign to find savings in federal spending. But as Mackenzie Gray reports, critics say right now it sends the wrong message.
It's a stark warning from Canada's top soldier.
There's no way that you can take almost $1 billion out of the defense budget and not have an impact.
That $1 billion cut to defense spending demanded by the federal government as a part of a larger bid to find $15 billion in savings, but selling that to frontline soldiers, a difficult task.
You know, our people see the degrading, declining security situation around the world, and so trying to Explain this to them is very difficult.
An explanation the opposition isn't buying.
These Liberals waste money on just about everything except our military. Why does the Prime Minister only cut spending when it hurts our troops?
We are committed to the significant and strategic long-term investments that will ensure that CAF continues to function as an agile, combat-ready force.
Those long-term investments promised by Canada this summer, reinforcing a pledge to NATO to increase defence spending to 2% of GDP. But right now, Canada falls well short of that mark, spending only 1.3%. To get to that NATO promise, the feds would need to spend an additional $18 billion annually.
Not only are you a laggard within your NATO alliance, but you're actually seeing that there are very few places to further cuts.
The minister overseeing the cuts, Treasury Board President Anita Anand, whose previous role as defense minister, saw her fight for more military spending.
One of the most rewarding parts of my job is to work hard for the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of ensuring that they have the capabilities, the capacities, the resources that they need.
The cuts spread over 5 years and represent only 0.7% of the total Armed Forces annual budget. But it's reducing spending as threats from Russia and China are only growing.
I don't think this is a helpful message. I think they should have made an exception to the rule that they ask all departments to effect cuts and excluded defense and explained why.
The move is unlikely to help with the enormous recruiting and retention issues facing the military right now, with an estimated 10,000 vacancies across the entire armed forces. Eric?
Mac, there's also news coming out of CFB Trenton today. A Canadian Forces colonel has been permanently removed from his position as a commander at the base. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Eric, it's a bizarre story. Colonel Leif Dahl was the commander of Canada's largest Air Force base, but now he's facing numerous firearms charges after he allegedly used a rifle and a revolver to shoot at protected wildlife from a boat near Belleville, Ontario, back in August. Now, the Ontario Provincial Police showed up, and that's when Dahl allegedly dumped both guns into the water, but OPP dive teams were able to recover the weapons, and that's left Dahl losing one of the top jobs in the Air Force. Eric?
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. An associate of the BC Sikh leader shot and killed in the city of Surrey says he was warned by police about threats to his life about 2 months after Hardeep Singh Nijjar was murdered. Gurmeet Singh Toor says he received a duty-to-warn document from law enforcement. Touria Izri reports.
Before his murder, Canadian authorities told Hardeep Singh Nijjar his life was in danger. And it appears he was not alone. Friend and fellow Sikh activist Gurmeet Singh Toor says Surrey RCMP and the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, or INSET, paid him a visit.
August 24.
In an interview through a translator, Toor says on the night of August 24th, officers knocked on his door and handed him this document titled Duty to Warn. The police have determined by way of one or more investigative avenues that your life may be in peril. At this time, we are unable to provide you specific details of the threat. The US-based group Sikhs for Justice, which advocates for a separate state from India, shared the document. Global News has verified it and found it's consistent with forms BC RCMP fill out.
When the RCMP sends out these kinds of warnings, it's not done just because they think there's some sort of vague threat. It's often done because there's credible threats, information.
Toor says he's going public to protect himself because he's afraid he could end up like Nijjar. Nijjar had his suspicions and shared them in a radio interview back in May. India has the ability to do it, he said. The Indian government calls the allegations absurd and labeled Nijjar a terrorist.
Good afternoon, everyone.
The Indian Minister of External Affairs traveled to the United States this week and met with the U.S. Secretary of State and U.S. National Security Advisor.
They obviously shared, U.S. views and assessments on this whole situation.
While Washington finds itself in the middle of the diplomatic dispute between Ottawa and New Delhi, Sikh Canadians find themselves increasingly worried about their safety and the safety of family abroad. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Hundreds of Air Canada pilots picketed at Toronto's Pearson Airport as labour talks between their union and the country's biggest carrier drag on. The Airline Pilots Association and Air Canada both say the so-called informational picket did not affect flight schedules. The union, which represents some 5,000 pilots, is calling for higher salaries and better scheduling to narrow the gap with their American counterparts. In the U.S., nearly 7,000 auto workers walked off the job today, joining more than 18,000 others at America's Big Three, a Ford plant in Illinois and a General Motors plant in Michigan were the targets of the latest job action. The possibility of a U.S. government shutdown is looming. Both chambers of Congress continue to butt heads over passing a short-term spending bill that would keep the government open for another 30 days. But with more on the possible shutdown and what it would mean, let's go live to Brittany Rosen, who joins us from Capitol Hill. Brittany?
Eric, time is running out and a government shutdown is looking quite inevitable at this point. Right now, it's scheduled for Sunday at 12:01 a.m.
The bill is not passed.
With a vote of 198 yeas and 232 nays, a last-minute long-shot bid to pass a stopgap bill to keep the government open did not pass in the House of Representatives Friday.
One thing I hope you realize about me is I never give up.
The bill put forward by Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was almost destined to fail, with a lack of support from his own party and an unwillingness from a handful of hardline Republicans to back the legislation under any circumstances.
The only way out of a shutdown is bipartisanship.
With a bill unable to get through the House, let alone the Senate, the possibility of a shutdown is very real. Federal workers pleading for lawmakers to work together.
You need to take the American workforce out of the political theater.
A shutdown would mean millions of workers would be furloughed. Those in the Military and Transportation Safety Authority would be forced to work without pay. A number of Washington museums, national landmarks, and all national parks would close. But the ripple effect would be much larger. Travel delays and disruptions to Medicare, Social Security, and food assistance programs impacting Americans who depend on those services the most.
Why aren't they doing their jobs? We're paying them to do it.
There have been 14 government shutdowns since 1980. The longest was in 2018, lasting 34 days during the Trump presidency.
This shutdown is very different from 2018 in a couple of ways. One is that large parts of the government were not shut down during the 2018 shutdown.
Now, what's notable here is that members of Congress will still receive their paychecks. And so we can expect lawmakers here on Capitol Hill to be working throughout the weekend, trying to come up with a solution. But at this point, Eric, there is no clear path forward.
Brittany Rosen in Washington, thank you. The unsolved murder of a rap icon back in the spotlight. Coming up, a new suspect arrested nearly 30 years after Tupac Shakur was gunned down. There's a major development in one of America's most notorious cold cases. A suspect has been arrested and charged with the 1996 murder of rapper Tupac Shakur.
27 years. 27 years. For 27 years, the family of Tupac Shakur has been waiting for justice. We are here today to announce the arrest of 60-year-old Dwayne Keith Davis, a.k.a. Keefy D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Tupac was gunned down as he left a boxing match on the Las Vegas Strip in 1996. Police believe Davis was inside the car involved in the drive-by shooting. And when they searched his home in July, they say they found corroborating evidence. He's the only one facing charges. The other 3 men inside the suspect vehicle are now dead. In Pakistan, dozens are dead after suicide bombers attacked mosques in 2 provinces. In the country's southwest, a powerful bomb exploded as people were gathering to celebrate the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad. More than 50 people were killed. Later, at least 5 people died in explosions at a mosque west of Islamabad. No one has claimed responsibility for the attacks. Pakistan is facing a dramatic resurgence in violent attacks against its security officials and civilians. In the UK, the crash of a school bus has claimed the life of a 14-year-old girl and the bus driver. The bus overturned on a highway this morning as it was taking students to school. 2 children are in hospital in Liverpool with serious injuries. 8 others were taken to surrounding hospitals. Investigators are trying to establish what caused the bus to flip on its side. Ahead, remembering a trailblazer for women in politics. What set U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein apart? Dianne Feinstein, the longest-serving woman in the U.S. Senate, has passed away at the age of 90. Representative Nancy Pelosi spoke today on the House floor to remember her colleague and honor her longtime friend.
To please rise for a moment of silence in remembrance of the late Honorable Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Senator from California.
Dianne Feinstein only ran to be a U.S. Senator after watching the Senate confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas that grilled not the Supreme Court nominee, but the woman who accused him of sexual harassment.
What did I see but an all-male Senate Judiciary Committee grilling Anita Hill? And it was not nice.
Feinstein blazed a trail for women in politics, but her career was launched amid tragedy. When San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk were assassinated at City Hall in 1978, it was Supervisor Feinstein who stepped forward.
Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed.
She was elected mayor. Outspoken and fast-rising in Democratic Party politics, she was on Walter Mondale's shortlist for vice presidential running mate in 1984. She was elected California's first woman senator in 1992, was put on the Judiciary Committee by Senator Joe Biden, and spearheaded a ban on assault weapons.
She went out and did something that was a product of an incredible amount of work.
After 9/11, as chair of Senate Intelligence, she led the review of the CIA's controversial waterboarding of prisoners.
She would take on any force, any special interest, any opponent with relentless integrity.
Feinstein was fearless, yet sought consensus, something increasingly rare in politics today.
This sounds like old-fashioned politics, which I still adhere to. She was always looking for where that common ground could be found and inhabited.
With health and memory failing, Feinstein stayed on in the Senate during difficult final months, but she is being remembered for all she accomplished.
She was a path breaker at a time when it was even harder for women to be in leadership roles.
Even Republicans are honoring her, a testament to a political pioneer.
An extraordinary senator. She was a trailblazer for women.
Athletes with the Lethbridge Kodiaks unveiled their new Indigenous jerseys today. The uniforms are just one way Canadians are commemorating the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation tomorrow. More on the path to reconciliation next. This temporary heart garden has been planted at the University of Manitoba to commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Each of the 310 hearts represents the memory of a child lost to the residential school system, while honoring survivors. Tomorrow marks the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, but commemorations are taking place all weekend. It's a time to reflect on this country's history and relationship with Indigenous people. Residential school survivors say just as important as a truthful look back is forging the way forward. Melissa Ridgen reports.
Residential school survivor Jennifer Wood has waited a long time to feel like this.
Canada has a different lens that they're looking through in terms of reconciliation. They're looking at our survivors and our legacy in a different way.
Her mother and 5 siblings went to residential school too, and for most of their lives carried those scars alone, part of a dark history unknown to many Canadians until recent years.
I believe that people are bringing down their walls of what they thought of survivors. I think now they have a greater appreciation for survivors.
She feels Canadians, for the most part, take reconciliation seriously, like newcomer Mark Turner.
I moved here back in 2014. So as a non-Indigenous settler and a steward of a business that's on Treaty 1 territory, I think it's important for me to like learn more and also educate the people in my life and like my staff as well.
September 30th is a federal stat holiday, but only 4 provinces and both territories recognize it with a day off. Manitoba is not one of them. For the past 2 years, Turner has closed his restaurant anyway. This year, he's doing it again on what's usually his busiest day of the week.
I think it's important to close down to kind of like raise awareness and like honor the survivors of the residential schools.
But some say the most obvious act of reconciliation that could be happening isn't.
Search the landfill!
Searching a Winnipeg landfill for the remains of at least 3 murdered Indigenous women. Manitoba Premier Heather Stephenson refused, citing safety and cost.
I have to protect all Manitobans throughout this, including those that would be asked to go into those landfills.
It sparked nationwide protests.
Search that landfill and do it now.
Your granddaughter, your daughter was sitting in a landfill and nobody wanted to look for her. What would you do? You'd be crying and fighting, and that's what we're doing.
Manitobans go to the poll Tuesday. The NDP have said if they win, the landfill search will happen, while Conservatives stand by their decision to not search. Families and advocates hope next September 30th we'll see reconciliation in action at the landfill. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
There is support for survivors, a 24-hour crisis line for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of their residential school experience. You can call toll-free and speak in confidence at 1-800-721-0066. And that's Global National for this Friday. I'm Eric Sorensen. Tonight's Your Canada is a collection of stamps to commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The Canada Post stamps feature archival images of 4 residential schools. They were designed in collaboration with the Survivors Circle of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Thanks for watching.